So we have a saying in Irish, in Nígan le Taka the Niha, which means at the end of the day, the night has to come. And so I must say I've really enjoyed being with you guys for the last 3 days. And this is the final session, but I'm hoping that we will continue to be in contact with each other and that we will continue to encourage each other, in the journey ahead. So for lecture 6, if you have the outline before you, I call it Awakening, Working in the Heavens. So this morning was more kind of an emphasis on the practicalities and this more on the esoterica. And you see here that I've created in the first point 10 rules for evolution as I understand evolution. And very, very briefly, I'll mention what they are and I'll make a few statements about each one of them as I go in. Firstly, that we're eternal beings. Secondly, we volunteer to incarnate. Thirdly, on planet Earth, we reincarnate hundreds of times. Fourthly, we tend to reincarnate with the same soul pod. Fifthly, we can choose to insert ourselves into any period of human history. Number 6, all of us on planet Earth right now have volunteered to be here at this time. Number 7, our objective is threefold. Number 8, violence never serves this evolutionary trajectory. Number 9, darkness or evil is the result of several factors. And number 10, this darkness has hijacked and corrupted all major human institutions. That's my first main point. The second one is a kind of a visionary experience I had in the middle of Mass about 6 or 7 weeks ago when we were celebrating Mass together. And I've said a little bit about it, and I want to kind of exegete it in more detail today. And then I'm going to try to end with a guided visualization where I will hope to help you to come in contact with maybe even one previous incarnational experience of yourself. Phyllis asked this morning about, that possibility. So I'm going to conduct a kind of a guided visualization that you can utilize to kind of springboard into our past incarnational experiences. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A as usual. So let me begin by saying this. I think Kathy Miller is with us again today. I saw her this morning. Sometime in 2011, when Kathy was still living in Menlo Park, she asked me one Sunday after a homily, what do you really think is happening in our world? And I kind of, tongue-in-cheek said, if I told you what I thought, you'd never talk to me again. And she said, I'd like to hear it anyway. So the very next Sunday, I gave a homily. It was November 2011 that I called Something is Rotten in the State of Denmark. And we use that as a springboard to create the exploration group. So every month for 18 months, there was a lecture on a particular topic. And then in between, we divided up into small study groups that researched the topic in more depth. And hats off to Don Loomis and to Bill Miller, who kept that process alive for many, many years since until the COVID shut it down. And the topics we covered during that 18-month period were the following: archaeology, agriculture, ecology, finance, justice, the mass media, medicine, the military-industrial complex, politics, science, spirituality, lucid dreams, extraterrestrials, and crop circles. So it was a fascinating period of time for our community. And many of the things that we talked about, in some senses, we were prescient. We were seeing into the future, and we're living the future that we envisaged at that stage. So we're now living in chaotic times that it seems that we had a sense then that this might be so. So as I said again, we're reviving that exploration group, and Don and Bill and Michael Choi, are agreeing to try to be the moderators of that group. So with that as a kind of a backstory, I created this system then that I think basically are the 10 rules of understanding our evolutionary trajectory. And it's interesting because there'll be a big emphasis on reincarnation, which many of you talked about this morning, and shared memories of. So here for me are what I consider to be the 10 rules of evolution, spiritual evolution. The first one is that we are eternal beings. We were never born and we never die. We are spirits in spacesuits. We are souls on safari on planet Earth. We are bite-sized bits of God who volunteered for human incarnational experiences. We are holographic fractals of Source. So we have neither a beginning nor an end, but we have an Earth mission. And it's amazing to me that so much research in the last 20 years has established that fact that we're much more than our physicality. And I'm going to mention just a whole bunch of areas that have contributed to that search. Firstly, the idea of near-death experiences. And literally tens of millions of human beings have had near-death experiences now, where because of the wonders of modern medical technology, they have been pronounced dead. In other words, there's no brain activity, it's flatlining, they're not breathing, and the heart isn't beating. But they come back reporting these extraordinary experiences when the brain itself cannot create any such experiences. So near-death experiences. Ray Moody popularized this way back in the 1970s. Then something he went on to talk about only in the last maybe 9 or 10 years were SDEs, shared death experiences, where nurses and doctors and sometimes family members who are sitting with the dying person themselves have experiences of going through the veil, that physicality seems to melt. Music, extraordinary music seems to come from nowhere, extraordinary colors. And so they have these extraordinary experiences that people who are still living, as if they're sharing in the experience of the person who's dying. And he called that shared death experiences. Thirdly, you have what are called deathbed visions. Again, where the dying person is interacting with and often in conversation with people who have passed through the veil many years before. And those in attendant on the dying people, nurses, doctors, and family members, they say, who are you talking to, mother? I'm talking to your dad. And dad just died 15 years ago. I'm talking to my grandmother. And so having these real conversations with people at the other side. The next one is what's called terminal lucidity. And this is a phenomenon where people who are dying and have had advanced Alzheimer's or dementias of various kinds, where for several years they haven't recognized anybody and haven't been able to talk coherently to anybody. And suddenly, some hours before death, they become totally lucid. They recognize everybody present and they have these really rational conversations with the people sitting around the bed. And then they die. So it's called terminal lucidity. Another one is called ADCs, after death communication, where people receive phone messages or images on their TV screens of people who've departed, literally leaving phone messages. So electronic equipment seems to be a simple medium where the departed can kind of come down a few levels of density, and interact with electronic equipment. They're called ADCs, after death communications, sometimes called electronic voice phenomena, EVPs. Then you have life between lives, which was popularized by the great American psychologist Michael Newton, whom I recommended this morning for his books called Journey of the Soul and the other one called Destiny of the Soul. And he investigated what happens when people are regressed and they experience not the last lifetime, but a period between lifetimes. And they report meeting with elders, sometimes with the iconic spiritual figures like Jesus or Buddha, having a life review, being mentored, going healing, and then being prepared for the life which is to come. But in the meantime, having access to the Akashic records and continuing their education at the other side of the veil. So this is called LBL, life between lives. Then you have all of the reincarnational phenomena. And this was popularized scientifically by an extraordinary man called Ian Stevenson, who was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, who spent 50 years investigating cases of reincarnation, particularly in India and the Lebanon and among the Alaskan Inuits, where children would report past lifetimes, and he would go in there and he would verify systematically and scientifically that the child was actually accurate in their memories of events that they couldn't have had access to in this young lifetime. Then you have work like the perinatal work by Stan Grof, a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist living now in the States, who with his holographic breathing techniques allowed people to volitionally alter their states of consciousness and have encounters with their own past incarnations. And then you have people who have psychic abilities, mediumship, or people who experience OBEs, out-of-body experiences, where sometimes when they're asleep at night or falling asleep, they experience some part of themselves leaving their body, floating up to the ceiling, watching their own physical body in the bed, and then voyaging and traveling any place they want to travel. So there's a lot of, and this is really good scientific research emerging over the last 20 years on all of these areas. So that's what I mean by the fact that we are eternal beings. That's my first rule of evolution. The second rule of evolution, I believe, is that we volunteer to incarnate in different worlds and different dimensions. I do not believe that we only have experiences on planet Earth, or that we only reincarnate on planet Earth. There are many, many different levels of life out there. As I said to you on Monday, there are parts of this universe which are 9 billion years older than our solar system. And there are more solar systems in the cosmos than there are grains of sand on all of the beaches and all of the deserts on planet Earth. So there are many, many worlds out there, and there are entities, some of them physical and some of them non-physical. It depends on their vibrational rate, the energy which they vibrate. So sometimes it's physical, sometimes it can come into physicality and leave physicality, and sometimes it is non-physical completely. It's energetic or intellectual or spiritual. And so we try out the ability to exist in all these dimensions, in all these different kinds of worlds. And the reason we do it, I believe, is in order to generate experiences for God. Now, what do I mean by that? In many, many great wisdom traditions, there's a kind of a Trinitarian formula for our understanding of the divine. So in Christianity, we talk about the God who is, the God who knows, and the God who loves. We call this Father, Son, and Spirit. And so in some senses, there's the isness of God, the very essence of Source. And then the fact that this God totally knows herself. And thirdly, that this God totally loves whom she finds herself to be. But there's only one problem. If God is all that exists, then there is nothing outside of God, and therefore there is no way in which God can generate new experiences. And so there's a fourth element. It's a quaternity, not just a trinity. And this is where God self-fractures. And then there's a beautiful phrase in this in Hebrew, netzotzim, that God fractures herself into these billions of light pieces, holographic fractals, in order to generate experiences. And so as we look around us, everything that exists in our physical world, whether it's a mountain or an oak tree or a bunny rabbit or a human being, every one of these is simply a manifestation of Source in order to generate experiences for Source. So the example I've used sometimes is like created beings, creatures are like bees in a hive. And every morning we leave the hive and we go out when we gather pollens and nectars, and we bring back to the hive and we share them with everybody else. We bring back to us not nectars and pollens, we bring back the stories of the encounters we've had. And so that is what we do when we return to Source at the end of an incarnation. We bring back all of these experiences, to make God laugh, at the extraordinary nature of our own creation. And so it's in this way then that, creation is the way in which the transcendence of God, which is totally ineffable. Creation is the way in which this transcendence takes on immanence, the ability to articulate itself in physical form. So that's the second rule for me, that we volunteer in all these different dimensions and worlds. Number 3, I believe that we possibly incarnate even on planet Earth hundreds, and some people would say thousands of times, until we have finally and fully grokked what the human experience can teach us. There is no way that as a white Irish male, I can understand the human experience in its totality. Unless I've been born in a lot of different other configurations, I haven't understood what the human incarnation is about. And so we come back again and again and again, and we change all the factors. We change all the pieces so that we have fully experienced what it means to be a human being. And now the research from the esotericists who study these areas say that we probably reincarnate after physical death sometime between 50 and 200 years after the last physical death, except if we have died very traumatically in a lifetime, and then we tend to reincarnate much more quickly, sometimes even within days or even hours of a very traumatic exit. And they say as well that we devote maybe just 20 or 30% of the soul's energy to a particular incarnation. So we're not totally invested in a particular incarnation. Since the soul is infinite, any portion of infinity is also infinite. And so any incarnation, it's not emptying the soul in order to experience creation, doesn't need to do that. So that's principle number 3 for me. Principle number 4 is we tend to reincarnate with the same soul pod over a period of subsequent incarnations. So it's like, we're like a Shakespearean troupe. So let's say we start a Shakespearean troupe in the Bay Area. And there's a whole bunch, like maybe there's 50 or 60 of us join this Shakespearean troupe. And this year we put on the play Hamlet, and we do a performance in Belmont, and then we move to San Carlos, and then to Mountain View, and then to Palo Alto. We put on the same play. And then next year we play Macbeth. But it's the same group of people, the same players, but we're going to shift now. We're playing totally different roles, maybe even different genders. And now we move from city to city, and we put on Macbeth. And then the third year, A Midsummer's Night Dream. So it's the same group of players, but we're playing totally different roles. So that group of players I would call the soul pod. And as we incarnate, I believe that we draw members from 2 different groups in the between lives, between the soul pod and what I call the shadow pod. We come in with people with whom we've had an affinity in previous lifetimes, who are friends of ours and supporters of ours, and we supporters of them. And we also bring into our lives difficult people from what I call the shadow pod, because unless we encounter opposition and challenge, we're not going to grow fully in any incarnation. When I was in Kenya, and part of my job was to try to teach agriculture to people who had been nomadic pastoralists for tens of thousands of years. And now, after independence in December of 1963, the government was forcibly settling the people into an agricultural lifestyle that they had no experience with. And so I was trying to teach them basic agriculture, particularly with maize, growing maize, and wimbi, millet. And what we found out over the course of years was that if the farmers had to choose between fertilizing the seeds as they planted them, or weeding the young crop as it started to grow, and for some reason they were not allowed to do both, but they had to choose between one or the other, they found out really, really quickly that it is much more important to weed than to fertilize. Because fertilizer is blind. You put down fertilizer, it'll give growth to everything. So the weeds will come up, and the grasses will come up, and thistles will come up, and thorns will come up, and lost in the middle of that is the maize or the wimbi. And so weeding it becomes really, really important. And so we all build weeders and fertilizers into our incarnation. The fertilizers are the people who will love us unconditionally, no matter what we do. And it's very important for our self-image and our self-confidence. But if there were only fertilizers in our lives, we'd all become, ultimate narcissists, totally focused on the self. And so we build in weeders into every lifetime, whose function it is to challenge us. And we're going to be weeders in their lives. So every one of us will fulfill 2 functions. We will be the supporters and the unconditional lovers of some people, and we will be the enemy figures for others, in order that everybody begin to grow. Now, the problem is that when we forget this, when we forget the fact that we've come in as a soul pod, we forget that we've chosen our parents. And we've forgotten the fact that there was an incarnation in which you were your mother's mother. And when you get that you've been in all these configurations, you can no longer be prejudiced. Prejudice dissolves in the face of an understanding of reincarnation. You can't be prejudiced against any group or any configuration, because you've been in that configuration yourself in a previous lifetime, and if you were prejudiced then against who you are now, it's no excuse for you being prejudiced now for who you are then, in the guise of somebody else whom you mistake for a self from a former incarnation. So that's rule number 4. Rule number 5 for me is that we can choose to insert ourselves into any period of human history, because time is merely an artifact of a particular form, a particular density of incarnation. It's an artifact of the human psyche. When we step out of incarnation, we step out of the linear notion of time. And so literally, we can insert ourselves into any period of human history at any time. And so if my last experience of incarnation, which it was in the early 1940s as a young Russian soldier. That was my last incarnation that I could retrieve, and then I died in 1944. I'm reborn in 1946. Now, at that stage, having been reborn in 1946, if I choose, or if my mentors tell me that you can, the next best incarnation in which you can grow the fastest is to insert yourself into the 1300s in North Africa as a slave girl, I can do it. So my next incarnation doesn't have to be in the 21st century or the 24th century. It could be in the 13th century, because time is a total artifact. So it might be, for instance, that at the end of an incarnation, you'd say, you know what? I would love to experience a lifetime around 550 BCE. I'd love to encounter either the Buddha or Confucius or Zoroaster or Ezekiel. And if your mentors believe that that's the best way that you can grow and learn, you'll insert yourself into that time period. That would be number 5. Number 6 for me is that all of us on planet Earth right now have volunteered to be here now, exactly at this stage. So we are, in some senses, missionaries to the planet. None of us is here by mistake. We are not here by chance. You're not here because a sperm and an ovum met. That's how you got here. It is not why you got here. You came here because you signed a very detailed preconception contract to be here now with the players with whom you're surrounded. And by the players with whom you're surrounded, I don't just mean your family and your friends. I mean all 7.8 billion human beings on planet Earth right now. That for me would be number 6. Number 7 for me is that we come here with 3 objectives. The first objective is, as individual souls, that we grow deeper and deeper and deeper into a kind of a Christ consciousness. The second one is that all of us are here to help wake up others, particularly those with whom we have social contact, whether they're family members or friends that we telephone or whatever. We're here to try to awaken all of our friends. And thirdly, we're here to try to shift the consciousness of the planet itself, to try to shift Homo sapiens sapiens into Homo spiritualis. So they're the 3 they're the 3 missions we set ourselves when we incarnate. Now, there's a difference then we have to recognize between the spirit and the space suit. The space suit has 2 agendas. It's about survival and reproduction. The essence, the scientific definition of life is that a species or a morphology is alive, it's living, if it can feed itself and reproduce itself as a species. And so that's the agenda of the spacesuit. I want to survive and I want to reproduce myself. So it's about basically feeding myself and reproducing myself. The soul has a totally different agenda. The soul is interested in unconditional love and unity consciousness. It's not about me, 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 me. It's not about survival. There's no question of survival because the soul is eternal. It doesn't have to concern itself with survival. It's about unconditional love and it's about unity consciousness. And I told you this vision I had many, many years ago where Gaia volunteered to breed life on planet Earth until she threw up a species capable of recognizing its own divinity and the divinity of all others. Homo sapiens sapiens has been auditioning for this role of being the species that will break through into divine consciousness. We've been auditioning for that role, but we have been really badly fluffing our lines. So either we're going to learn, the script well and deliver the lines and give a tremendous performance, or God is going to give this role to some other species that will come after us. That's our choice. Either we're going to step up to the plate this time and be the great actors that can deliver, the performance, or we're going to be passed over and we become just a little footnote in history. That would be number 7 for me. Number 8 is that violence in thought, word, or deed never serves the evolutionary trajectory. And all of the great teachers have said this to us. The Buddha, Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela. They've told us this again and again and again. And in spite of that, for about 7 millennia now, we've tried violence. We've tried using, violence to solve violence. We've tried killing human beings as a way of solving human problems. And it's never worked. And the creatures have been constantly showing us the insanity of this. Only love and compassion and forgiveness will shift the paradigm. Every time you see corrupt systems overthrown violently by the liberators, eventually the liberators become even more violent and more corrupt than the system that they overthrew. And I certainly have seen that in my lifetime. And I certainly saw it in Africa when African nations became free and were replaced by, freedom fighters who then became more violent than the colonialists whom they overthrew. So that's number 8. Number 9 then is darkness and evil as the result of many factors. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I spent all of lecture 2 talking about those factors, 9 different factors. And number 10, the fact that darkness has hijacked and corrupted all the major human institutions. And I just mentioned what they are without going into any more detail. You find this darkness, has infiltrated, corrupted, and controlled agribusiness, education, finance, the justice system, the mass media, materialistic science, medicine, the military-industrial complex, politics, and religion. So for me, when I look at the evolutionary trajectory, it's taking cognizance of all of these and moving beyond them. So that's basically my first point. My second point, I call it the path to Noster vision. It must be about maybe 6-7 weeks ago now, when I was saying Mass here in this room, on Zoom for the COJ community. And when it comes to the Our Father, I typically introduce the Our Father by saying, I want just to imagine that we're holding hands throughout the world with all sentient beings, and that we're praising God, our Father, and our Mother in this process. And right in the middle of it, I had this kind of image, and it totally distracted me momentarily. What would it be if we were to be able to do that in some fashion? So, historically speaking, since the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens, about 70,000 years ago, when you do the statistics on it, there have probably been about 111 billion human beings who have lived on planet Earth in that 70,000 year period. It's estimated statistically that about 111 human beings have lived on the planet. Now, I began to think of what if all of these were to be able to hold hands in some fashion. Suppose we just said, for instance, that every soul has had 100 incarnations on planet Earth. It means then that there have been 1.1 billion souls on planet Earth 100 times, so that gives you 111 billion. So there's 111 billion different souls. And I started doing the math in it. Suppose those 1.1 billion souls were to reach out hands. So let's say this is a 5-foot spread. I'm holding somebody with my right hand and somebody with my left hand on a 5-foot stretch. That would mean 555 billion feet, which is 105,113,636 miles, which is the equivalent of 4,205 circuits of the Earth at the equator. So I'm thinking, what if this were a spiral instead of, being around the equator 4,205 times? What if it were a spiral that began at the North Pole? So the first person is standing on the North Pole, holding the next one, who's holding the next one, and we're spiraling our way down the northern hemisphere, around the equator, down into the southern hemisphere, and the last person is standing on the South Pole. Now, what would it be to create that spiral? And to realize that the people you're holding hands with, 100 of them are yourself. 100 of these people are former incarnations, and you look around you, and that's what I want to pick up on the guided visualization I'm going to lead us through eventually. As you look to your right and to your left, 98 of the people you're holding hands with are yourself. Except sometimes you're going to look black, sometimes yellow, sometimes white, sometimes female, sometimes male. And I want you to kind of make a connection with all those selves of you. And so in some senses, the soul is having all of these simultaneous experiences, all these jivas, that are holding hands right now. So, and each role you, as distinct from each soul you, is holding hands with other versions of yourself. And then at the two extremities, you're holding hands with another soul who's also having 100 different incarnational experiences of itself. And this chain, this concatenation of souls is spiraling around planet Earth. And we then become the light bringers. We're impregnating planet Earth with our soul selves and the incarnational experiences we've generated over that 70,000 year span of Homo sapiens sapiens as we attempt to give birth to Homo spiritualis. Now, to complicate things a little bit, it's very, very possible that we're having simultaneous lifetimes. And I want to give just a few analogies to try to illustrate what do I mean by simultaneous lifetimes. Since I believe that time is an artifact of incarnation and that time doesn't exist in a linear sense, once we step out of incarnation, then it is very possible that instead of there being chronological incarnations from the 13th century to the 17th century to the 21st century, that many of these experiences are happening simultaneously. So I'm going to use a few analogies to kind of illustrate this kind of weird idea. So firstly, I want you just to be aware of your body right now, your physical spacesuit right now, what you call me. Right now, this spacesuit of yours, this one organism that you regard as a monad, as a single organism. This organism now is composed of many, many physiological subsystems. You've got a cardiovascular system, you've got an immune system, you've got an endocrine system, you've got a musculoskeletal system, you've got a lymph system. So this thing that appears to be one is actually composed of many subsystems. And then you look at each of these subsystems. You take any one of them. Let's say the lymphatic system or the endocrine system, let's say. And you realize that the endocrine system consists of a pituitary gland, a pineal gland, thyroid, thymus, adrenals. It has all these organs as part of the system itself. And they're all part of what you regard as you. And then you take any one of these organs, let's say the thyroid, and it consists of trillions of cells. Excuse me. It consists of trillions of cells. And so each of these levels, whether it's the organism per se, whether it's the cardiovascular system on its own, whether it's the heart within that system or the cells within that system, they're all operating both independently and cooperatively. And so when you look at what you call you, the total you, at the same time, all of these subsystems are operating simultaneously. Every single one, down to the last single cell. And you've got about 70 trillion cells in your body. And while all that activity is happening simultaneously inside you, you're at the sink, you're washing the dishes, you're singing, you're planning supper, and you're growing a baby in your womb. So internally, and externally, you're operating at all of these levels, and they're all happening independently of each other, and they're all happening, simultaneously. Now, each activity and all the levels are contributing to who you are as far as your spacesuit is concerned, and they're all happening at the same time. So there you're having simultaneous physiological experiences. Now, similarly, I believe that simultaneous incarnations also operate both independently and cooperatively, and they establish who you are as far as your soul is concerned. So they're operating independently as incarnational experiences, and they're operating cooperatively as simultaneous incarnational experiences. That's one kind of analogy. Another one would be this. Imagine you're an actor and you've played roles in many, many, many movies or many, many dramas. And now you're reviewing all of the movies in which you took part and realizing, in that particular movie, here's what I learned about acting. In that movie, here's what I learned about acting. In this movie, it taught me this about life. That movie taught me about that in life. And then you cross-pollinated all of those learnings from all of those movies in order to be who you are now as an actor. And you bring all of that into the next movie in which you take place. So they're simultaneously happening in your mind, and you're putting all the pieces together, and you're learning from it, and you're going forward. Or maybe a simpler example, imagine you discover an old photo album, and you're going through all of the photographs nostalgically, all the ways from birth photos that your parents took of you up to recent photographs that you took. And you begin to realize that all the different phases of your life informed how you lived subsequent phases of your life. But you cross-pollinated those. As you grew, you cross-pollinated experiences you were having in school, experiences you were having with your friends, experiences you were having with your family, experiences you were having when you watched, television. And all of these are being simultaneously, deconstructed, and processed and integrated into who you are. Now, that is the function of the bardo state, the life between lives, where we synthesize, and process all of the either sequential or of the simultaneous incarnations that we've had. And that is the function, I believe, of a retreat, such as we're having right now. That the function of any retreat, when you draw apart for a few days, as we've done for 3 days now, it is to try to live all of these simultaneous experiences you're having at every level, and try to integrate those into the realization of who you really are, of who God really is, of who your neighbor is, and of what your mission is. And so in order to aid that process, for the next maybe 10, 15 minutes, what I'd love to do, I'm going to lead us through a guided visualization. And it's going to be predicated on the vision I had during Mass a few Sundays ago, the Pater Noster vision, where I saw this spiral, of beings holding hands and creating a spiral circumambulating planet Earth. And so if I want you to be as comfortable as possible right now, and I want you to, if you feel comfortable about it, just close your eyes. And I want you to breathe in as deeply as feels comfortable to you, at your own pace. And I want you to realize that the breath is the interface between spirit and matter. In many, many languages, a single word that means breath and life and spirit. And so in Hebrew, the word ruach, is the spirit of God or the breath of God or the life force itself. In Hindi, it's prana. In Greek, it's pneuma. We talk about pneumatic tires. You put air into the tire. It comes into Swahili, we call it pepa. In English, it even sneaks into English. We talk about inspiration and expiration. And inspiration means to breathe in, to take in air. It means also to be creative, to be inspired. And it's also to be alive. And expiration means to breathe out, to let go of spirit or to die. And so in all languages, breath is the interface between life, death, and reliving, reincarnation. So as you're breathing in deeply, I want you to realize that you're contacting your core self, your essential soul. So for the next few breaths, I want you to imagine that as you breathe in, you're taking fresh oxygen into your bloodstream, and your heart is pumping that into every cell of your body, into the mitochondria, which transforms oxygen into energy and is a healing process. So with the next breath you take, I want you to imagine this oxygenated healing blood flowing down to the soles of your feet and your insteps and ankles. And everywhere it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And every time you breathe out now, you can let go of any discomfort or pain in that part of your body and relax. And with your next in-breath, I want you to imagine this healing oxygenated blood flowing down into your calves and shins and knees. And every place it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And every time you breathe out now, You can let go of any tension or pain or discomfort in that part of your body and relax a little more deeply. And with your next in-breath, you feel this healing liquid coming down into your thighs and quadriceps and buttocks and pelvic area. And every place it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And every time you breathe out now, you can let go of any discomfort or pain or tension in that part of your body and relax even more deeply. And with your next in-breath, you feel and see this extraordinary liquid coursing throughout your torso and visiting all of the internal organs, your heart and lungs and liver and kidneys and spleen. And every place it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And every time you breathe out now, you can let go of any discomfort or tension or anxiety in that part of your body and relax even more deeply. And with your next breath, you feel this healing liquid coursing from your shoulders down into your biceps and triceps, through your elbows, into your forearms and wrists, into your palms, and into your fingers, right down to the fingertips. And every place it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And every time you breathe out now, you can let go of any discomfort or pain or tension in that part of your body and relax even more deeply. And finally, with the next breath, you feel this healing, oxygenated, life-giving blood coursing up through your neck, into your chin and jaw, into your mouth and nostrils, into your eyes and ears, up along the sides of your head and the back of your head and the crown of your head. And every place it touches, it brings healing and it brings peace. And it touches all of the internal parts, your intellect, your imagination, your willpower, your memory bank. And every place it touches, it brings healing and light and life. And every time you breathe out now, you can let go of any anxiety you've been feeling or any tension, any depressive thoughts, any fears for the future, and allow yourself to relax completely. And in that relaxed state, I'm going to take you on a little journey. I want you to imagine that you're in a meadow on a beautiful sunny day with just a very light breeze blowing. And you're barefooted in the grass. And you can feel it rubbing against you, the feeling of grass against the calves of your legs. And you feel the solid earth beneath your feet. And you can hear birds singing. And a gentle breeze is wafting your hair from your face. And at the end of the meadow, you spy this great ancient oak tree that seems to be filled with life and birdsong and wisdom and age. And you walk across the meadow and you reach out to touch the bark. And suddenly a hidden doorway swings outwards, revealing an interiority. And you realize that if you step inside, you're going into a treasure trove of wisdom. And you step in through the opening, and you find yourself at the top of a spiral staircase, a great oak spiral staircase that wends its way down. And in spite of the fact that you're inside the tree and you've not closed the door behind you, the whole area is suffused with this golden light that seems to be caressing you and welcoming you. And you put your hand on the oak banister and you wend your way, spiraling down deeper and deeper and deeper until you find yourself in this great, elegant oak corridor. And at the end of the corridor is a beautiful oak doorway. I want you to go down there and to enter. And you're going to find yourself in the Akashic records, in the Hall of Records, where every single event ever experienced by any sentient being has been recorded by a grandmother guide. And I want you to step in, and you're looking at these extraordinary rows and shelves filled with volumes of wisdom. And you realize there actually is an entire section dedicated to you, to your soul. I want you to find where that section is. And you see there are many, many volumes, each volume representing an incarnation. So I want you to allow your intuition to guide you to one particular volume and pluck it from the shelf. And you're going to find a very comfortable seat. I want you to find that seat, seat yourself, and I want you now to peruse the contents of that volume. And I'm going to remain completely silent for the next 5 minutes. And I want you to experience that past lifetime. And with your eyes still closed, I want you for the next 2 minutes, I want you to take that experience with you and to now visualize yourself as part of this extraordinary concatenation of souls circumambulating the planet from the North Pole to the South Pole. And bring that realization with you. And now for 2 minutes, I want you to envisage this group impregnating planet Earth with light and with healing. And now over the next 5 seconds, as I count back from 5 to 0, I want you to begin bringing your attention and your awareness back into the room in which you are right now, in this present incarnation, and back into this meeting of kindred spirits on Zoom. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Welcome back. I do. It's a hugely important insight, because the truth is, when I said that breath is the interface between spirit and matter, that literally every time you breathe in and breathe out, you're actually reincarnating. And therefore, as you live consciously, every time you breathe, you're creating a new version of yourself. And therefore, you're having a new interface with the environment in which you find yourself. My definition of personality is that personality is the interface between the soul and the environment in which it finds itself. You know, I disagree with psychology. Psychology holds that the personality is an artifact of nature and nurture. And there's a big fight, which is more important, nature or nurture, whether it's kind of genetics or, environment. I think there are 3 factors that go into personality. Nature and nurture are certainly part of it, but the most important part of all is the soul that's coming in with its previous trajectory of learnings and experiences. And when you put a soul into an environment, a personality emerges, because that's the interface between the essence and the environment in which it finds itself. Now, in actual fact, every time you breathe in and breathe out, you're creating a new environmental interface between the you, the essential you behind the physicality of you, and the environment and the world in which you're living. And since the world is literally changing instant by instant, it literally is. There are 7.8 billion people all over the planet who are making decisions that are changing the energy of the planet. There are earthquakes, there are volcanoes, there are winds, there are hurricanes that are changing literally the ecology of the planet. So every time you breathe in and breathe out, you're actually facing a totally new world. And so you're now facing and saying, yes, I will live this moment as well. Yes, and I will live this moment as well. So in actual fact, every breath you take is a reincarnational experience. So hats off to you for coming to that realization. That's a great observation. I would agree with your kind of analysis of it. Yes, it's like a recurrent dream. We all dream several times every night, but sometimes we have recurrent dreams that come back. And it's interesting, when you start working with recurrent dreams, you see that details begin to change. When you don't work with them, you get the same dream again and again and again and again, until you take it seriously enough that you begin working with it. And then the same dream may come back, but there'll be significant details that are changing until finally you don't need to have that dream anymore. Now, in some senses, reincarnational experiences, recovering past lives is like that. So in your trawling of the oceans of your incarnations, if you're coming up with the same fish on regular occasions, that's one that you've been invited to pay special attention to. Mm-hmm. So what I would say to you is, if you can recover whatever details of that lifetime you can recover, there are lessons there. And the question becomes for you then, in this present incarnation, what aspects of those lessons are you being presented with? And so it gives you, in some senses, it gives you a kind of a leg up on your understanding of your mission, because it's telling you again and again and again, look at this one, look at this one, look at this one, the same one. Because if you look closely at this one that we're showing you again and again and again, that's the clue as to what your real purpose is this time around. So I would say work with that particular image of that particular incarnation. It's a great observation. That was the homily I gave actually last Sunday on the 14th of March. It's up on YouTube already. It's on my website. So you can get the full treatment there. So I don't have time, obviously, to go into all the details right now. But it was interesting that I showed how women had been written out of the Bible, beginning with the account of the Last Supper. And a lot of people contributed resources. So people like Hannah Burke and others, contributed books that they had read. Michael Choi came up with a few. Cecile Greenleaf came up with a few. So if you go back to the Lawrence Bird sends out a message every single week in which he includes all of the references and all of the books that people have recommended or videos. If you go back to that, you'll find a treasure trove of books that have been written about Sophia and the Shekhinah, the feminine face of God, and who Magdalene really was, and who Mary, the mother of Jesus, really was, and of some of the other great women throughout Christian history, like Hildegard von Bingen, and like the great saints, Teresa of Lisieux, Teresa of Avila. So there are sources out there. Now, this is an area that scholars are beginning to really dig into and unearth. So there's going to be a lot of references you can access if you get onto Lawrence's list from last Sunday's Mass. Okay. I remember a homily I gave in Palo Alto, it must be 15 years ago, which I titled Jesus as an Extraterrestrial. Right. And I'm only being semi-facetious about it. What does an extraterrestrial mean? It means somebody who's from off planet in some way. Now, if you believe that Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit and that Jesus didn't have any physiological father, if you choose to believe that, then what you're saying actually is that Mary was impregnated by an extraterrestrial. Now, this is an idea that you find in many, many, many different mythological systems. You find it in Judaism. In chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, there's this extraordinary story where we're told that the sons of God found the daughters of men to be very attractive, and they took them to wife, as many as they wanted, and they gave birth to the Anakim, who were a race of giants. And that group is mentioned several more times in the scriptures. And so there you have the notion that, divine beings, gods, and they were plural at this stage, had intercourse with human subjects. And it went both ways. It wasn't just male gods impregnating human females. It was female gods having intercourse with males. And you find this very, very strongly represented in the Roman pantheon of gods, in the Greek system of gods, in the Sumerian systems of gods, in Celtic folklore, the very same thing. The notion that gods, of some kind had intercourse with humans and created a race of, there's something called demiurges or demigods. So in that sense, if you subscribe to the belief system that Jesus didn't have a physical father, I don't personally believe that, but if you subscribe to that belief system, then you're saying actually that Mary was impregnated by an off-world, energy we call the Holy Spirit. And so what does it mean? It means in some senses that I believe every single one of us is an extraterrestrial. When you look at our soul, our sun is about 5 billion years old. There was a previous generation of suns and solar systems going way back towards the beginning that exploded billions of years ago and scattered all its energy out into the expanding cosmos. And this material began to cluster through gravitational forces and created new suns and new solar systems and new planetary models. So every single element in your body is star stuff. Every single one of us is composed literally, physically, and anatomically and atomically of star material. So every one of us is off planet, in a sense. The material of which we're composed is off planet. Now, I've said many, many times to you that I believe that the two forces of creation are light and sound, the logos, and the light. So we know from physics that all matter is frozen light. Literally, all matter is frozen light. And all morphology is created by resonances, by the word. So when John says at the beginning of his gospel, in the beginning was the word, logos, and the word was with God, and the word was God. All things were created by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. So that somehow sound is the organizing principle. So it's like you have, as a child, you get a lump of mala. What do you call it here, mala? Play-Doh, right?
Oh, Play-Doh.
Play-Doh is the stuff. And then you make figurines out of it. And so light is the Play-Doh, and the intelligence creating forms out of the light is sound or logos. And so we know that actually sound creates patterns. I remember sharing with you one time a story from Belgium, a city in Belgium, which was celebrating its 1000th anniversary as a chartered city. And they commissioned a famous musician to write music for the occasion, and it was going to be a week-long celebration. And he chose to conduct a bunch of experiments with sound. And two of the experiments I'll mention. He had bakers come in and create dough, masses of dough, and then divide it into two groups. It was the same dough. And he had one group of bakers then bake this dough and create little cookies. And he asked them to put them in circular shape. And the other group got the same dough. We asked them to pray over the process, that while they were baking the dough, that they sang hymns. And they baked it, and they were to create triangles out of the cookies. And then as people were coming into the exhibit for the next 7 days, they got two cookies, a circle and a triangle. And they were asked to fill in a very simple questionnaire, which one did you like best? And with hugely statistically significant results, everybody preferred the stuff that was made, that was prayed over. They didn't know it was being prayed over. So it's like the sound of the voices praising God somehow, impregnated the very dough and created this effect. The second experiment he did, he took a sheet of plate glass, 8 foot long by 4 feet high by 1 inch thick, and he clamped it in an upright position. And then he got hot soapy water and he poured it along the spine so that it was flowing copiously down the sides of the plate glass. And then he had musicians come up and play their instruments in front of the plate glass. And depending on the pitch and the tone and the instrument, it created all of these extraordinary patterns on the soapy water, because sound is an organizing intelligence. And so when you bring logos and light together, that is how creation comes into being. And every single one of us is light stuff. And the last thing that Grandmother God spoke to us as we were about to parachute into incarnation was to teach us our secret, sacred name, the sound of our own being. And then secondly, remind us of the mission that we were on. And so Jesus is an extraterrestrial, and you're an extraterrestrial. Spirit is extraterrestrial. Everything, the origins of all are off planet. And that's the sense in which I used it. But I intentionally did it in such a way that I'd jar people and get their attention. This little video is something that I played several weeks ago in church. And in some senses, it sums up my entire thesis. It is two little girls telepathically communicating about life on planet Earth.
So tell me, out of everything you've ever done, what's the craziest experience you've ever had?
That's easy. Earth.
Earth? You went to Earth?
I did.
No way. You were a human?
I was.
Wow. Are the stories about Earth true? Were they really trapped on Earth?
Some were. I know because I was one of the volunteers.
Wait a second. You volunteered to go to Earth?
I did. I had to. I had family trapped on Earth.
But how could you get trapped on Earth?
You had to be there to understand. On Earth, you wouldn't remember anything.
What do you mean you wouldn't remember anything?
I mean, you would have no memory of anything. You wouldn't even remember existing before Earth.
What? How is that possible?
It was designed that way. It was brilliant. To dive as deeply as possible into such ignorance, such darkness, and still find your way back to remembering who you were, that took true mastery.
Wow. I still can't believe you went to Earth. Tell me more.
Well, Earth had its own set of laws that everyone agreed to experience, like gravity. What goes up must come down, like linear time. Day is followed by night.
Time? What's time?
You know how when we think of something, it manifests instantly? Well, on Earth, there was a delay. The delay is what made Earth so difficult.
Interesting. Time. So tell me more.
Before going to Earth, you would choose your family, whether you wanted to be male or female, what race you wanted to be, the location on the planet, things like that.
Oh, so you could choose your own character.
Exactly. You would enter the Earth as a baby and be completely dependent on others to teach you the rules. But since nobody could remember the rules, they made up their own rules, based on fear and giving your power away to others.
That doesn't sound like much fun.
It wasn't for everyone.
What'd you do while portions of you were on Earth?
I watched them. It was pretty funny.
What was so funny?
Here were these magnificent beings, playing the most unique and cutting-edge experience in the universe, and they were clueless. I tried to guide them as much as possible.
Wait a second. You could communicate with them?
Yes, but they couldn't hear me. I would show them synchronicities, or send them impulses to help guide them, but they couldn't see the signs.
Why not?
They didn't trust themselves.
So is that why they sent out a call for help?
Exactly.
Is that when you went?
No, I didn't go until later. First volunteers, they had it the worst.
What do you mean, had it the worst?
Well, they killed them.
What?
They killed the volunteers.
They killed them?
Those on Earth couldn't understand what the volunteers were telling them. The idea that they were equal to the volunteers scared them.
What were they telling them?
Common sense stuff like, all the answers you seek are inside you. Everything I can do, you can do and more.
So they killed them?
And then they twisted the volunteers' message and created even more fear.
What do you mean more fear?
Like the message, God is inside you, was turned into, you are separate from God. The message, all the answers you seek are inside you, was twisted into, you can't trust yourself.
And they believed it?
It was out of control.
How could they believe that?
You had to be there to understand. Did you know they actually believed that they were the only intelligent life in the universe?
Now that's funny.
Pretty crazy, I know.
So then what happened?
The designers knew Earth was going to enter a section of the galaxy that humans had never experienced before. A section filled with a frequency that might be able to reconnect the human's DNA.
What was wrong with their DNA?
It didn't work anymore. The thing is, their DNA was how they connected with their higher self.
So that's why your incarnations couldn't hear you.
Exactly. But there was a catch with the new plan. Only those incarnated on Earth could tune in to these new frequencies.
Oh, so they needed more volunteers.
Yes, but this time they were taking no chances. To pull this off, they needed millions in the physical form, wired and ready to attune to these frequencies.
Are these the 21st century humans that all the stories are about?
Yep, we volunteered from every corner of the universe to help the humans wake up.
What did the volunteers have to do once they got there?
We had to wake ourselves up, attune to these frequencies, and spread them to the rest of the planet.
That sounds impossible.
Most of those watching the Earth experiment didn't think we could pull it off.
So what happened when you got to Earth?
Once on Earth, we were taught the same fear-based beliefs that had been handed down for eons. We lived just like everyone else, totally clueless to who we were and what was getting ready to happen. But as soon as the Earth entered this cloud of frequencies, we started to question everything. And one by one, we started to wake up.
So the plan was working.
It was. The more we trusted ourselves, the quicker we reconnected. And the faster we started to remember what was happening. And since we were spread out evenly all around the planet's frequency began to rise quickly.
What happened when the planet's frequency began to rise?
The humans' experience of time began speeding up. They started manifesting their beliefs faster and faster. Those consumed with fear created even more fear, and eventually Earth just spun out of control.
What do you mean, spun out of control?
These low-frequency beliefs that had controlled the human experience for eons could no longer exist, so they began to self-destruct, and the world fell into complete chaos.
That sounds terrifying.
It was for those living in fear, but for us volunteers, we all knew it was the end of the old energy and the beginning of the new.
So then what happened?
A tipping point was reached in our awakening, and we created a new Earth.
A new Earth? What happened to the old Earth?
It continued on, allowing those who could not let go of their fears to play out their lessons. But for us, we created a new Earth that matched our higher frequency. And as easy as that, all the fear-based beliefs simply fell away. In an instant, we remembered who we were. We knew we were all connected, and we stopped hurting each other. We started respecting each other, started loving each other. We took back our power to create, and we created a new Earth without fear.
Wow. So the legends are true. What an incredible experience that must have been. Nice work.
Thanks.
So I suppose it's a version of it. I'm not a big believer of a Christ who's coming back with a sword to separate sheep from goats. I'm a believer rather that, people who are raising their own vibration by being loving and compassionate are literally spinning off a new species that I've called Homo spiritualis. So it's not about coming back to and I don't believe in an Armageddon where there's good guys and bad guys. It's rather that those who are ready and those who are loving are going to experience a world of love, and those who are committed to greed and warfare will continue to experience a world of greed and warfare. There's going to be a parting of the ways. So I want to end at this stage, guys. I don't want to hold you any further. So I would just like to say at this stage how deeply grateful I am to all of you who are taking 3 days out of your busy schedules, to brainstorm together and to create a synergy of our experiences in order to try to be a soul pod that is adding our little bit, that we are like a single neuron on a cosmic brain of Christ consciousness. So I thank you very much for doing that. Specific thanks to David Karkik, this man behind the scenes, this quiet, deeply spiritual man whom I've known for many, many years, who's been recording all of the homilies since 2007 and putting them up on YouTube and on the website. I'm deeply grateful to David and for being part of the technology today. And most of all, I'm deeply grateful to Karen, who plays so many roles in the life of COJ. This is just one of many roles she plays. The amount of work and time and energy she to create this retreat, I can only guess at it, but I am deeply, deeply grateful to Karen for bringing us all together. And now, Karenina, over to you.
So time for some thank yous. First, to all of you for joining our retreat and enriching and deepening these days together with your time and your energy, your comments and your questions, and just your presence. I have enjoyed it. I have enjoyed my 1 o'clock discussion groups, and I'm amazed at the depth of thinking that's going on within this group. So what do I say to Sean? So to Sean, for your love and generosity and courage in taking on this difficult topic, for sharing your thoughts with us, for being willing to be our guide through the darkness, and for shepherding us back transformed and expanded into the light, well outfitted for the mission that we all signed up for. Thank you, Father Sean. We hope to be returning to Bishop's Ranch next year, provided COVID, everything about that is in the past. And that will be on March 20th through 23rd of 2022. There's a lot of 20s, if you'd like to put that on your calendar already. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Karenina. God bless, guys.
God bless.